The House will come to order. Members, please take your seats. Sergeant at Arms.
The House is now in session. All persons not entitled to privilege of the floor, please retire to the gallery.
The members will rise and be led in prayer by Pastor Eugene Cowan II, New Light Full Gospel Baptist Church, Virginia Beach, and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, which will be led by the delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Herring.
Let us bow our heads in prayer. Almighty and righteous God, we exalt your holy name and give you glory for this new day, filled with the abundance of your grace and mercy. We bring before you the delegates of this house, and we ask that you bestow upon them your grace, your wisdom, your strength, and synergy to work together for the common good of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Father God, touch these your servants for such a time as this. Guide them to make decisions that are just and equitable, upholding the core beliefs of this Commonwealth, the enjoyment of life and liberty, the pursuit and attainment of happiness and safety for all. Holy God, do not allow partisan politics to hinder this body from doing all within their power to do better for the lives of its citizens and for the good of the people of Virginia. My prayer is that the challenges of infrastructure, early childhood education, affordable and attainable housing, voting rights and systems, taxes and equitable wages would not have to wait for the next election, but be addressed and resolved in this present moment. God, I ask you to grant this House of Delegates the grace, the wisdom, the strength to accomplish these tasks for the greater good of the Commonwealth of Virginia. In the name of the one who was, who is to come, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. In the name of those who will bow, who every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. It is in his name we ask these blessings. Hallelujah and amen. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Energetic. Yes, ma'am.
This thing ain't moving. Members will answer the roll call by indicating their presence on the electronic voting board.
Mike.
Clerk will close the roll.
Mr. Speaker, a quorum is present.
Pursuant to House Rule 3, I've examined and approved the Journal of the House of Delegates for January 13, 2025. Motions and resolutions under Rule 39 pursuant to the provisions of Rule 40 are now in order. Does the clerk have any announcements or communications?
No communications at this time. Mr. Speaker, simple announcement or correction on the printed calendar of today's hard copy of the calendar, page 2, House Joint Resolution 2. The new LIS system didn't quite pull the right title line. So House Joint Resolution 2, for those members here in the chamber who are using IHOD to follow along, is correct. They're fixed it on the online version, but House Joint Resolution 2 is a Constitution Amendment first reference, qualification of voters, right to vote, persons not entitled to vote. That information is correct online to the public in here, but is not correct on the calendar, and I will duly note that a second time when we come to that portion of the calendar. Mr. Speaker, that's all the announcements I have. So therefore, in this first portion of the morning hour, Speaker requests you use the request to speak button for the items listed by reference up on the voting board.
The delegate from Virginia Beach, Delegate Fagans.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for the purpose of introduction.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker and body, today I rise to introduce Pastor Cowan, who provided us the prayer today. Pastor Eugene Cowan serves as a senior pastor of New Light Full Gospel Baptist Church in Virginia Beach, Virginia, where he leads a mission of real, relevant, and relational ministry. Born in Detroit, Pastor accepted Christ at the age of 5 with his call to ministry at 17. With 35 years of experience, including 24 as a senior pastor, he is deeply committed to serving both his congregation and the wider community. Pastor leads New Light Full Gospel Baptist Church with First Lady Shemaya. A dedicated leader, Pastor Cowan holds a Master of Divinity from Central Baptist Theological Seminary with a BS in Management and Ministry Leadership from Cornerstone University. He also brings a unique expertise as a board-certified chaplain and pastoral counselor, and a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, and a former Detroit police officer. Under his guidance, New Light Full Baptist School of Excellence and New Light Community Development and Outreach has flourished, providing vital resources and opportunities for the community. Pastor Cowan continues to inspire and uplift through his ministry and dedication to the kingdom's work. I would love if we could please give a warm welcome to one of my favorite pastors, Pastor Cowan.
Well, welcome, Pastor Cowan and family. Welcome. Delegate from Colonial Heights, Delegate Cherry.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for the purpose of an introduction.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are joined in the gallery today by representatives of the Association of Public Safety Officials and the National Emergency Number Association. And if they'll please rise so we can acknowledge them. They represent approximately 3,000 dispatchers from around the Commonwealth. These are the very first of the first responders. Without them, the police, fire, and EMS provider doesn't know where to go or what they're going to expect when they get there. They are a calm voice when the person on the other end of the phone might be experiencing their very worst day. They are here today as part of their third annual E911 Goes to Richmond to advocate for enhanced pension benefits and improved worker compensation coverage for their career field. That includes HB 1563 and HB 1564, which I have it on good authority are really good bills. Because that's legislation that I'm sponsoring to provide the enhanced benefits for state and local dispatchers. Mr. Speaker, I hope it will be the will of the body to give them a warm House welcome.
Welcome to the Capitol today, and hopefully this guy can deliver. The delegate from Albemarle, Delegate Laufer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a purpose of an introduction.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask Delegate Carlson to join me. Today in the gallery above us, we have members of the Charlottesville Area Association of Realtors. Can they please stand? We can see them. This esteemed organization is celebrating its 100-year anniversary this year, a tenure marked by dedicated service to the real estate community and residents of Central Virginia. Today, CAR represents more than 1,300 real estate professionals and affiliate members, serving the counties of Albemarle, Fluvanna, Greene, Louisa, and Nelson, as well as the city of Charlottesville. Over the past century, the association has made profound changes, embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion into every aspect of its operations. Their commitment to professionalism and ethics has established it as a trusted and reliable resource in the real estate community. These real estate professionals are not just experts in their field, but also champions of community development, enriching the neighborhoods they serve. The association engages in a variety of educational programs and community service events each year, demonstrating a steadfast dedication to improve the lives of those in our region. Through their dedication, CAR has helped create a stronger, more vibrant Central Virginia, a legacy we celebrate today. I ask all of you to please join me in applauding CAR for a century of service and excellence. Thank you.
Welcome to the Capitol today. The delegate from Hanover, Delegate Fowler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, it is about that time of the session again. Thank you. We're going to, on Thursday, January 16th at 7 o'clock on the 7th floor, the House North Subcommittee meeting room, we're going to have our first meeting of the Virginia Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus, Mr. Speaker. The special guests for the meeting are Ryan Brown, Executive Director of Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, and Jamie Green, Commissioner, and Joseph Grist, Deputy Commissioner of the Virginia Marine Resources Commission. Executive Director Brown's discussion is going to be on basically an update on DWR in 2025, and Commissioner Green and Deputy Commissioner Grist's discussion will also be on the Virginia Marine Resources Commission. So again, I hope y'all will join Delegate Carr and myself at 7 o'clock, and I'm sure we'll have some coffee and snacks for you. And Mr. Speaker, you're welcome to come too. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. The delegate from Richmond City, Delegate Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rise for an introduction.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, sir. In the gallery today are members of the Board of Directors of the Virginia Business Higher Education Council, who are here for their annual meeting and legislative day. I ask that they may please stand if they aren't already in the back standing. As they are there, you will see some of the leading business executives from around the Commonwealth and presidents of some of our public colleges and universities, as well as our former Speaker, Kirk Cox. The Council is actually a partnership, the nation's strongest and most active partnership of business and higher education leaders. This partnership is one of the big reasons why Virginia's higher education system every year receives top national rankings for quality, graduation rates, and return on investments for graduates. Please join me in saluting the important work that our business leaders and college presidents are doing together to create growth and opportunity all across the Commonwealth.
Welcome to the Capitol today, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Delegate from Richmond County, Delegate Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for the purpose of introduction.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you. In the gallery, we have today the Lancaster County, next door, my neighbors, Richmond County, the Lancaster County Republicans who made the trip to Richmond this morning to see all the inner workings of the General Assembly and, of course, decided to come to the House first. So please join me in giving them a warm House welcome.
Welcome to the Capitol today. The delegate from Henrico, Delegate Willett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for the purpose of an introduction.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today we are celebrating Virginia Community Health Center Day. It's my pleasure to introduce a group representing and from the federally qualified health centers. That includes 203 delivery sites across the Commonwealth. Over 50 health center advocates are with us today, walking the halls, sharing their information about the comprehensive health services that FQHCs provide in our communities and some of the pressing issues facing the General Assembly in terms of their funding and what they do with those services. In 2023, the healthcare center served over 400,000 patients, of which 90% were low income. Health centers improve access to primary care and integrated specialty services, including preventative, behavioral substance use treatment, oral vision, and pharmacy services. Mr. Speaker, during our Rural Health Select Committee work, we toured multiple FQHCs around the state. They're a vital component of our healthcare services. Please join me in welcoming them to the House today.
Welcome to the Capitol today. The delegate from Suffolk, Delegate Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for an introduction.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in the gallery, joining us is New Virginia Majority. I ask them to please stand. New Virginia Majority is a statewide civic engagement organization that builds power in working class communities of color across the Commonwealth. They organize in communities year-round for racial, economic, and environmental justice. New Virginia Majority has advocated for citizens returning from prison to have their voting rights automatically reinstated after paying their debt to society for nearly 2 decades now. They have helped restore and register over 30,000 returning citizens throughout Virginia, while the folks that they help come from all walks of life. The majority of them are people of color, particularly black men, who are overly represented in all stages of our criminal legal system. Today, I'd like to acknowledge them in the gallery for their tireless work to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to participate in our democracy. I hope it will be the will of the body to give them a warm house welcome.
Welcome to the Capitol today. Delegate from Arlington, Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise for an introduction.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very proud to rise to introduce former Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger. A true public servant, Representative Spanberger has always served our communities, our Commonwealth, and our nation. She began her career of public service as a federal law enforcement officer working money laundering cases and tracking narcotics traffickers with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. She then joined the CIA as a case officer. She worked undercover her entire time at the agency, collecting intelligence, managing assets, and overseeing high-profile programs to combat terrorism and keep Americans safe. In 2014, Abigail brought her family back home to Virginia, where she and her husband grew up and began a career in the private sector. We all know in 2018, she became the first woman ever elected to represent Virginia's 7th Congressional District in the U.S. House. Thoughtful and knowledgeable, in Congress she developed a reputation for finding common ground, getting things done, and never backing down from her principles. She led bipartisan efforts that were signed into law to prevent fentanyl overdoses, protect Virginia's natural resources, and support our veterans. And she fought to lower prescription drug costs, strengthen workforce training programs for Virginia students, clean up Washington, and protect Virginians' fundamental rights. Mr. Speaker, I ask that the members of the body give Abigail Spanberger a warm House welcome.
Shouldn't you be out knocking doors or something? But welcome. The delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Bennett Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for the purpose of an introduction.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Joining us in the gallery today are representatives from the Right to Vote Coalition, if they could please stand. This coalition is comprised of many state and grassroots organizations, including the NAACP, the ACLU, the League of Women Voters, New Virginia Majority, Virginia Organizing, and No Left Turns, among many others. Mr. Speaker, I know that I'm not allowed to introduce any individual by name, but I wanted to especially recognize the executive director of No Left Turns. She works tirelessly to support the reintegration of those with felony convictions and reduce recidivism, and she was honored as a 2022 Richmond History Maker for championing social justice. She has been a leader in the fight to permanently end felony disenfranchisement in Virginia and in the Right to Vote Coalition. The coalition represents not only voting rights advocates, but criminal legal reform advocates, as well as Virginians directly impacted, educational institutions, and reentry organizations. The coalition's goal is to amend Virginia's constitution to include a clear, consistent, and fair reenfranchisement for Virginia citizens by 2026. Like the majority of Virginians, coalition members believe that all qualified citizens should have access to the ballot, including those who have served their time and people with disabilities. Representative democracy depends on all of us being represented at the ballot box. I am so grateful for their decades of advocacy, and I hope you will join me in giving them a warm House welcome.
Well, welcome to the Capitol today. The delegate from Norfolk, Delegate Glass.
Gratitude, Mr. Speaker. I rise for the purpose of an introduction.
Delegate has the floor.
Right. Gratitude, Mr. Speaker. In the gallery today, we have with us some high school students from the Hague School, and I'd ask for them to rise. The Hague School is in Norfolk, and they know all too well what it means for a little bit of rain to make a whole puddle in front of their school, or more like a lake. So they're here at the Capitol today advocating for clean water and environmental support. It is not often that we get young people at the Capitol doing this kind of work, so I would hope that it would be the pleasure of this body to give these students a warm house welcome.
Welcome to the Capitol today. Pursuant to House Rule 30, the Journal shall reflect that the following members are away on pressing personal business and are granted leave from today's session. Delegate Marshall. The clerk will call the next order of business.
Mr. Speaker, the second portion of the morning hour reserved for legislation to go by for the day. Mr. Speaker, moving from the uncontested to contested, I'm not aware of any such request.
Clerk shall announce the next order of business.
Mr. Speaker, the third portion of the morning hour reserve request members legislation go by for the day, and similarly, I'm not aware of any such requests.
Clerk will announce the next order of business. The delegate from Prince William, Delegate Maldonado.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for the purpose of a motion. Speaking to that motion.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to bring forward this resolution as the Joint Courts Committee has certified judges for both judges of the Judicial Inquiry and Review Commission, as well as for the court, Circuit Court, General District Court, and Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court. I ask that we move adoption of this resolution.
So, go.
House will be at ease. Clerk will report a resolution.
Mr. Speaker, House Joint Resolution number 476, HJR 476, election of Circuit Court judges, General District Court judges, Juvenile and Domestic Relations District Court judges, members of the Judicial Inquiry and Review Commission, as well as the Auditor of Public Accounts. And renew your motion.
Delegate from Prince William, Delegate Maldonado.
I now ask that we move the resolution.
Thank you.
Shall the resolution be agreed to? House will be at ease. Shall the resolution be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, no 0.
Ayes 99, no 0. The resolution is agreed to. Clerk will announce the next order of business.
Mr. Speaker, the fourth and final portion of the morning hour are reserved for member requests for points of personal privilege.
The delegate from Richmond City, Delegate Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we've already mentioned, today we are being visited by the Virginia Board of Directors of the Virginia Business Higher Education Council. And as mentioned earlier, this partnership is one of the big reasons why Virginia's higher education system every year receives top national rankings for quality, graduation rates, and return on investment for graduates. It is also one of the big reasons why Virginia won CNBC's #1 ranking as the best state for business again this year. As CNBC wrote in explaining that ranking, and I quote, Virginia's biggest competitive strength is its education system, ranked #1 in the CNBC study. CNBC went on to highlight the wealth of higher education opportunities Virginia provides, and they specifically cited our investments in higher education over the last 5 years. Speaking of those investments, Mr. Speaker, I want to call the members' attention to the J. Larker Report on Higher Education Cost and Efficiency. That was issued in October. The report shows that our colleges and universities have been excellent partners in using increased state support to make college more affordable for Virginia students and their families. Here are some key findings by J. Lark that may surprise you. When adjusted for inflation, the total cost of attendance at our public universities has actually gone down since 2020 in response to the increased state investment we've provided. In fact, over the past 10 years, the total cost of attendance in constant dollars rose only slightly, an average of less than 0.5% annually. And for most institutions, the net price, that's the price students actually pay after financial aid, actually went down over the last 10 years. Mr. Speaker, while that is great evidence of partnership, there's more work to be done. We need to make 2- and 4-year degrees and industry recommended credentials affordable for all Virginians. Help students move efficiently from learning to earning here in the Commonwealth. Despite our recent investments, Virginia still provides much less funding per college student than Tennessee, North Carolina, Georgia, and Maryland, to name just a few nearby competitors. And while the Commonwealth must continue to do more, so must our higher education institutions and our partners in the business community. We need colleges and universities to develop even stronger partnerships with businesses and industry to improve performance and ensure that all students have paid internships and pathways to good jobs and careers right here in Virginia. That is what the Virginia Business Higher Education Council is all about, building those partnerships and pathways, giving all students affordable access, and keeping talented young Virginians here in the Commonwealth after graduation through internships and talent pathways. Mr. Speaker, we are the best state for business, the best state for higher education, and the best state for internships. And we have this great competitive advantage because of the bipartisan spirit of partnership evident on this floor and in the gallery. Please join me in saluting the important work that our business leaders and college presidents are doing together to create growth and opportunity all across the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Clerk will call the calendar.
Mr. Speaker, continuing with today's business, the calendar for Tuesday, January 14th, the calendar of the House of Delegates, separate from the judges. First category, resolutions, regular calendar. Resolutions, regular calendar, page 1. If you're following on that way, first up is House Joint Resolution number 1, proposing an amendment to the Constitution of Virginia by adding in Article 1 a section numbered 11A relating to the fundamental right to reproductive freedom. Mr. Speaker, this legislation was reported to the Committee on Privileged Elections with a substitute.
The delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Herring.
Mr. Speaker, may we go at ease?
The House will be at ease. Delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Herring.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the committee substitute.
Shall the committee substitute be agreed to? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The committee substitute is agreed to.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, HJ1 is intended to protect Virginia's reproductive freedom. In a post-Dobbs world, federal law is unclear on reproductive health. To that end, and ensuring access to reproductive health care is left to the states to answer. Ensuring fair access to reproductive health care and largely leaving the issues between a woman and her doctor is where the conversation about health care should begin and end. HJ1 amends Article 1, the Bill of Rights of the Virginia Constitution. It provides a Section 11A, fundamental right to reproductive freedom. It provides that every individual has a fundamental right to reproductive freedom, including the ability to make and carry out such individuals' own decisions relating to prenatal care, childbirth, postpartum care, contraception, abortion care, miscarriage management, and fertility care. The resolution protects the continuum of care related to the reproductive freedom and health of every individual. Indeed, we have seen threats to the provision of abortion care, contraception, and fertility care offered in this body. It provides that an individual right shall not be denied unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the less restrictive means. The resolution does specify that the state may regulate abortion in the third trimester, but may not restrict abortion where it is medically indicated to protect the life, physical or mental health of the pregnant individual, or the fetus is not viable, keeping with the current law that we have. It includes a provision prohibiting discrimination and provides protection for individuals who exercise their fundamental right and for those who assist individuals in the exercise of that right. It also provides that regulation of abortion requires a compelling state interest for the limited purpose of maintaining or improving the health of an individual seeking care, consistent with the accepted clinical standards of care and evidence-based medicine, and does not infringe upon decision-making. Mr. Speaker, I ask for passage of this resolution.
The delegate from Chesterfield, Delegate Early.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the delegate yield for a question?
I yield.
Thank you. When I'm looking at the resolution, I know it uses the word individual, so my question is, because it's not adult, does it apply to any and all individuals, including minors?
Mr. Speaker, I would...
Just to remind those who may not be refreshed on this, all questions go through the chair, not to the delegate. Thank you.
Yeah.
She may answer.
Mr. Speaker, I would respond to the delegate that this complies and is consistent with our code language and regarding individuals, and that there is protection that does not touch the code section for informed consent for a minor.
Mr. Speaker, would the delegate yield for another question?
Will the delegate yield?
I yield, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, my question to the delegate would be, is it her understanding that this does not supersede our parental consent and parental notification laws?
Delegate Herring.
Mr. Speaker, I answer the delegate yes.
Mr. Speaker, would the delegate yield for another question?
Will the delegate yield?
I yield, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate will yield.
Mr. Speaker, I've heard that this is essentially keeping our current law or reinstating Roe, but my question is, Roe and many other states, when they passed their amendments, drew a line at fetal viability, whereas this one does not. So my question for the delegate is there a reason this amendment does not draw that line, but instead actually defines compelling state interests differently than Roe, only being permissible when it talks about the health of the mother?
The delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Herring.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will respond to the delegate that this resolution does, in fact, address fetal viability on line 25, and it does provide that if the fetus is not viable within the professional judgment of the physician, then consistent with medical and evidence-based practices, that if it's needed to save the life of a mother, then abortion can take place.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, would the delegate yield for one final question?
Okay, cross-examination. Will the delegate yield?
I yield, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate will yield.
Mr. Speaker, I want to understand under this amendment, is there anything or any reason why a physician could not sign off on a 40-week abortion if the only concern is a mental health concern?
The delegate from Alexandria.
I would answer the delegate that the doctor would make that decision consistent with evidence-based and medical practice. So if the delegate is referencing mental, that provision of the code, I would say that there are many reasons that their abortion may be needed. And I will give an example. If a 10-year-old has been raped and then finally is discovered by the parents that the child has been raped, it provides an ability to provide an abortion consistent with current law.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of the resolution.
The delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I have read this resolution over and over again, and I've heard the responses on the floor, and I have brushed up on my law school classes about Roe versus Wade, and I can only come away with one impression, which is that this is among the most extreme and ideologically driven constitutional amendments among any that have been proposed in the nation. There are a myriad of reasons to oppose this resolution. And there's so many things that we could talk about. We could talk about how, despite the answers we heard, this resolution absolutely obliterates parental rights, hook, line, and sinker. It would supersede any state law we have, and it includes minors, and it absolutely would get rid of parental consent and parental notification. Any lawyer or anybody who's ever been in a court knows how easy it is to make these arguments, and given this language, that's a slam dunk. So if you wanted to cut parents out of the process, if you wanted to cut parents out of one of the most important decisions that a young woman could possibly face, this amendment would be the way to do it. We could talk about how this amendment erases even the possibility of some of the most common sense guardrails around health and safety, given its broad language. We could talk about how if you're creating a positive fundamental right to something, that very clearly opens the door to taxpayer funding of it, because if it's a positive fundamental right, you're not going to discriminate against them just based on the fact that they can't afford it. We could talk about how it will allow for the latest of late-term abortions with only a mental health reason. That's all. That's all, for a perfectly viable child. We could talk about how the term reproductive freedom is not defined anywhere, and as we all know, could mean almost anything. Mr. Speaker, this is not a narrowly tailored bill, nor does it reinstate Roe versus Wade. In fact, it goes far beyond, and it's extreme in every possible way. So, Mr. Speaker, I think we could go more in depth on each and every one of these points, but frankly, I think the House is already aware of them. So I want to set those aside for a second. Mr. Speaker, I think on this issue, we have debated it so much in our lives and heard about it so much that, frankly, I think we can't see clearly anymore. We have all become so entrenched in our lines of thinking that we sometimes forget to ask the most simple question of all, which is, what exactly are we talking about, and who exactly are we talking about? Mr. Speaker, there is a lot in life I don't know. In fact, I'm confident there's a lot more in life that I don't know than I do know. But I do know just a couple things. I know that I've had half a dozen foster kids in my house, each and every one of which have come from unbelievably difficult circumstances. And I know that despite those circumstances, the world is a better place for each and every one of them being here. I know that origin stories do not dictate destiny. I know that my 5-year-old son, who was adopted through foster care, he had no business being born by the world's standards. He didn't have any business at all being born, but in fact he was. And I know that he's one of the most joyful kids I have ever known, and he's brought unfathomable joy to me. Mr. Speaker, I know what it's like to sit in a hospital and hold my own child miscarried 16 weeks after conception, and I know what it's like to see their face and see their fingers and see their toes, and to have no doubt what it is that was in my arms, a child. Mr. Speaker, what I know is that humanity is always better when we respect the individual person and we see the image of God in them, and when we live up to the creed that all are indeed created equal, endowed by a creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life. I'm asking the House today to try to break out of our entrenched thinking and to see that there's another side to this story and to see that there's another person involved. Mr. Speaker, this resolution is not only extreme, and it is, but the real problem with it is that it's fundamentally misguided because it refuses to open its eyes to the lives and futures of children. I ask the House to vote against this resolution.
The House will come to order. The delegate from Chesterfield, Delegate Corner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak to the resolution.
The delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, today I stand before you not just as a delegate, but as a mother who is celebrating her daughter's 15th birthday today. A milestone filled with hopes, dreams, and the beautiful chaos of growing up. Yet as I reflect on this special day, I am filled with an overwhelming concern for young girls across our Commonwealth who may soon face life-altering decisions without the guidance and support of their parents. The proposed constitutional amendment we're discussing today is extreme, and it does strip away parental rights and notification. Nothing's changed in this since committee, and our own staff attorneys agreed in those committee meetings that this would supersede existing code. This is not a political issue. This is a deeply personal one that affects families in profound ways. I'd ask the body to consider this. I am required to be present for every single one of my children's doctor's appointments today, from everything from as mundane as a cold to annual routine physicals to play in school sports. Yet this amendment would allow my daughter and countless others like her to make a decision that could change the course of her life without ever consulting me. How can we justify this contradiction? How can we place such a heavy burden on young women across the Commonwealth? The reality is that this amendment does not protect our children. It leaves them vulnerable. It's forcing them to navigate complex and life-changing decisions alone without the wisdom and guidance of the very people who know them best, their parents. I cannot imagine my 15-year-old daughter having to face this decision without me. Having to face this decision without my support and my love and my ability to walk a path with her when she's making such a critical decision. Every child in Virginia is unique. Every child comes from different circumstances. But if they have it, we should guarantee them the safety net of their parents being involved. As parents, we are the first line of support for our children. We help them sort through feelings and fears and chaos and all the things that they're facing. We should not be sidelined in such a critical decision that young girls across this Commonwealth may face. So I urge the body today to not strip our daughters of the ability to talk to their mothers and their fathers. Let's empower our families to navigate tough decisions together and ensure that we are not stripping young girls of the ability to talk with their parents. Thank you.
Okay. The delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Herring.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the resolution.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I've listened to the comments that were given. I believe that there was a misrepresentation of a council's opinion about parental notification. The law is the law until a court says it's not, that it's not constitutional. This law is consistent with our code. But I also ask the delegates who are concerned, think about the example that I gave you of a 10-year-old girl who was raped. It would allow that child, consistent with our law, to go to a judge to get judicial bypass if they were raped by a parent and were not able to go to that parent and say, I need an abortion. Mr. Speaker, I fear that those who oppose this amendment fail to see and recognize is that in states that have adopted restrictions on abortion, like Texas and Georgia, women are dying. And I would say, Mr. Speaker, these are similar or exact same restrictions that are introduced in this chamber. Women die because doctors are not able to provide the health care that will protect them. And in fact, in Georgia, it was a simple DNC that would allow a woman to survive, and she died because of restrictions. This amendment is in the spirit of Roe. It recognizes trimesters, but it will also protect the women of Virginia from extreme pieces of legislation that we have seen time and time again in this chamber. We do understand on this side of the aisle the need to have good relationships between children and their parents. And if this is challenged, I will say that, Mr. Speaker, there was no intent to take away parental notification. The law is our law until the court says it is.
The delegate from Buckingham, Delegate Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Welcome. Delegate from Buckingham, Delegate Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speak to the resolution.
Delegate has the floor.
Life has many first steps. We can recall when our kids and people we love took their first steps, literally on a linoleum kitchen floor in Lawton, Oklahoma, or in an apartment in Washington, D.C., or in a small house on Cutshaw Avenue here in Richmond, Virginia. But each person has many first steps. Heck, I'm 52 years old, and I took a huge first step in May of 2018. A first step towards a driver's license, a first step with a diploma, a first kiss, a first step in the funeral of someone that we love. A good argument can be made that a child's first steps occur, many of them, when they're still protected inside their mother's womb. And today, I want to discuss those first steps. The best-selling book ever written has a verse, Matthew 25:40, which I will paraphrase, that says, "Whatever you do to the least of these, so too you do unto me." If you're interested, you can check Matthew 25:41 as well for what happens when you don't realize that. So here in Richmond, people speak up for themselves and they speak up for others. But a baby can't speak because one of that baby's first steps is developing vocal cords. And that happens around 13 weeks. 2 weeks before that, you're readily able to identify the sex of the child in utero. 6 weeks before that, the baby had the first step of developing a distinctive head separate from its body. In much of the world, some places that some people look down their noses at, all of these first steps are protected by law. Places like Poland and Haiti and Egypt and Iraq, but not in Virginia, not with this extreme resolution. At 15 weeks, many other first steps have been achieved. The baby, she can suck her thumb. She can smile. She's beginning to literally, at this point in her life, practice breathing. And in even more places, these first steps are protected by law. France protects life at 12 weeks. So does Ukraine, Italy. The first steps of life are protected at 14 weeks in Austria and Spain, but not in Virginia, not with this extreme resolution. At 22 weeks, so many more first steps have been taken. The baby has a sleep cycle. She can wake up when she hears a loud noise or is jostled about. And so we know that long before this, she could hear. Limb movements display, and I'm quoting the Cleveland Clinic here, conscious coordination, and are frequent. She can even hear our voices. She can hear her mother's heartbeat and the rumble in mama's tummy after that late night slice of pizza. The baby's first steps are now protected in Sweden and the Netherlands, but not in Virginia, not with this extreme resolution. At 24 weeks, even more first steps have been taken. The first step of fully developed lungs is taken. The first step of weighing more than 2 pounds is taken. Heck, at 24 weeks, the baby can take her first steps outside of her mother's protective womb and live, which we know because it was proven by Curtis Sykeith Means in 2021, who was born at 21 weeks and today lives. And the baby is protected in even more places. Places like India and Singapore and Great Britain, but not in Virginia, not with this extreme resolution. In fact, of 193 nations surveyed by the United Nations by this point, this baby's first steps are protected in 185 of them, but not in Virginia, not with this extreme resolution. But we're at 24 weeks, there are 16 weeks left, so let's just skip to week 40. She may have a full head of hair. She's turned inside of her mother so that she approaches delivery. She may weigh 6 to 10 pounds. In 37 to 40 weeks, the baby may literally arrive in this world outside of her mother's protective womb at any time. And she is absolutely, positively a viable human life. And she is protected by law almost everywhere on earth, but not Virginia. Not if a mental health professional says mom may be depressed or suffer heightened anxiety, or if a doctor notes that childbirth, even in the best case scenario, is an inherently dangerous event. No, in instances described above and in so many more instances, Mr. Speaker, there is no protection of these first steps. None in this extreme resolution. In this resolution, a mother whose therapist fears postpartum depression could literally justify at week 40 after labor sets in, a mother taking a left turn towards the delivery room or a right turn towards the abortionist. That's just exactly the first step that a vote in favor of this resolution is. And so I will end as I began by paraphrasing Matthew 25:40. Assuredly I say to you, brothers and sisters, inasmuch as you did it to the least of these, so too you do it to me. Thank you.
The delegate. The delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the resolution.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the delegate from Buckingham for pointing out that literally everywhere in the civilized world, viable unborn children are protected in the womb, and that this resolution, when it becomes part of our Constitution, is going to run afoul of that widely held and understood concept. The word supersede was used a few minutes ago by the delegate from Chesterfield. This is going to supersede all of those state laws that we have heard over and over again, and even on the floor today, are going to be protected, are going to be consistent with state law, going to be consistent with Roe versus Wade. This is not consistent with either. And I think the public should be completely aware of what this does. Again, we have heard over and over again that this word salad that keeps churning and that we got handed 5 minutes before we were going to vote on it in committee does those things, that it embodies state law, that it embodies Roe v. Wade. I just want to pull out a couple of things. Some of them have been alluded to already, but I want to highlight how this word salad is being used to cloud the true intentions of this amendment and what it will mean for Virginia and for all of Virginia's laws. In our existing law, we have a 3-doctor standard for late-term abortions, whereby 3 doctors have to basically agree about those protections of the life or health of the mother. In this new version, which will be in the Constitution, mind you, not in state code, it only requires 1 doctor. Guess which doctor can say that in his or her professional judgment that an abortion is required under these circumstances? The abortion doctor can do that under this resolution, under this constitutional amendment. The abortion doctor alone, without any consultation with anyone else, in his or her professional judgment, can make that determination. You know, I was so glad, and I'm thankful to the delegate from Alexandria that she revised her remarks as to the legal effect of this, as to parental consent and parental involvement in a very serious life decision and medical procedure, right? Parents are involved in every other medical procedure, but not this one. That will not be the effect of this. You are creating, my colleagues are creating, Mr. Speaker, by passage of this amendment, a fundamental right for any person. Minor child is not exempted from this. You could have exempted minor children from this, Mr. Speaker. Our colleagues could have done that, but they chose not to. So this is not consistent with code language in that it will completely override all code language the minute it becomes a part of our state constitution. So the word salad in here about 3rd trimester and compelling state interest, and all those words meant to make it look like it's like state law or make it look like it's like Roe versus Wade, are really not the way this is going to play out. Roe versus Wade, ironically, lays out a case for protecting viable human life. I don't think a lot of activists on either side of this debate understood that. I want to read from Justice Blackmun. With respect to the state's important and legitimate interest in potential life, the compelling point is at viability. This is so because the fetus then, presumably, has the capability of meaningful life outside the mother's womb. State regulation protective of fetal life after viability thus has both logical and biological justifications. If the state is interested in protecting fetal life after viability, it may go so far as to prescribe abortion during that period, except when it is necessary to preserve the life or health of the mother. Again, we are told that this is essentially just an embodiment of Roe. But what this does is take the compelling state interest language, which in Roe is about the unborn child, and turn it on its head and make that compelling state interest only referring to the individual seeking care, with no regard whatsoever to that viable unborn human life. So this doesn't embody state law in the least. It doesn't embody Roe versus Wade in the least. In fact, it goes well beyond all of that to become arguably the most extreme abortion measure in the nation and possibly in the civilized world. We used to, I think I even heard it uttered today, that abortion is between a woman and her doctor. The haste with which this was constructed, the word salad that had to be constructed to check a bunch of boxes to make sure this sounded a certain way, or that it sounded like existing state law, or it sounded like Roe versus Wade. This amendment, Mr. Speaker, doesn't even respect that this is necessarily between a woman and her doctor, because nobody can define what a woman is anymore. So now it's the individual. Now it's the individual. This could have easily said woman. It doesn't. I don't know what the unintended consequences of drafting decisions like that mean for this. When other considerations come into play, when posturing comes into play, when having to check a certain box about not using the word woman anymore comes into play, I don't know what the legal ramifications are of that, Mr. Speaker. A few years ago, I'll just end with this, and I know you'll be glad when I do. I was privy to a moment of unbridled honesty in the General Assembly, whereby a colleague of ours had a piece of legislation, just a bill, that was going to do these same things. It was going to create the unfettered right to an abortion up until birth, which is what this does. And my colleague admitted as much. And as much political hay as we made out of that at the time, Mr. Speaker, I've never lost sight of the fact that this moment of honesty happened, right? And we don't do a lot of that around here all the time, either side. And I don't think we're going to get that level of intellectual honesty on the floor today. But this does the same thing that did. And it doesn't just change a code section. It puts it in the Constitution of Virginia, in theory, for all time. And with all the unintended consequences that these words may have when a court goes to look at it in the future. The moment we had a minute ago where there was this recognition that parental consent is likely to be affected by this, rather than the previous understanding that it's all going to be consistent. No, this will supersede parental consent. The tacit agreement with that notion should at least give us pause that maybe this is not ready, and that pushing ahead with it is not in the best interest of Virginia. It may be in somebody's interest to have this go through like it is. Mr. Speaker, years ago, or last year, we had a moment. A lot of my colleagues didn't agree with it, where I think we recognized where Virginia was, that Republicans recognized where Virginia was on this issue, that they did not want to ban abortion, and they did not want to have an unfettered right to an abortion up until birth. And so we tried to find a measured response to that. You may remember the governor had a 15-week proposal that he proposed that even went beyond, as the delegate from Buckingham said, and went beyond progressive France at 12 weeks. And again, not everybody was happy with that, because this is not an issue that you can parse for some people, and I understand that. But we at least tried to find a way forward that was consistent with where we thought Virginians were. This is not that. This goes every bit in the other direction. It is wrong-headed, and it is wrong for Virginia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Culpeper, Delegate Freitas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the resolution.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you. Again, when we talk about the language that's used, the procedure that we're going to vote on today, or one of the procedures that we're going to vote on today with respect to how abortions are performed, is a D&E. It's more commonly known as a dismemberment abortion. Now, currently in Virginia law, we have some restrictions on this in the third trimester. Remains to be seen whether or not those will remain in place. But it's still applicable all through the second trimester. There's some debate right now within the medical and scientific community on when a baby in the womb can feel pain. Many say it's 24 weeks. Some say it's early as 12. That falls within the first or second trimester. 12 weeks in the first, 24 in the second. If you look up what a D&E abortion is, a dismemberment abortion, it'll talk about removing tissue. But a former abortion nurse described it this way. Guided by ultrasound, the abortionist grabbed one of the fetal legs with his forceps. He clamped down hard and with a twisting and tearing motion ripped the leg from the little body. He brought it out and threw it in the pan beside me. I stood in horror as I looked as this little leg in the pan with perfectly formed toes. I had never seen such a small human body part. The next time he went in, he tore off an arm with hands and little fingers. I could see the fetus on the ultrasound screen trying to get away from the forceps. Then I no longer saw the heartbeat on the ultrasound screen. He continued to do this until he had all the extremities out and placed in the pan. He then snapped the fetal spine with the forceps. I could see the jaws of the forceps open and close on the ultrasound screen as the abortionist tried to catch the bobbing head. After crushing the head with the forceps, he then pulled it out and threw it in the pan with the rest of the body parts. That procedure will be constitutionally protected in the Commonwealth of Virginia if this resolution passes. I'll be thinking about that description every time this session I am lectured by members on the other side of the aisle about the necessity for human rights, about compassion and tolerance and being a voice for the marginalized and speaking up for those who can't speak for themselves. Because regardless of what terminology we use, that procedure, that description will be included. And what's fascinating to me is that when I tell people this, not just my constituents, when I tell the other side of the aisle's constituents that this is what they're going to protect, I get told that's not true. Nobody wants to do that. That doesn't happen. Here's your opportunity. Stand up on this floor and tell them they're right. This isn't going to happen. Say it. Get up on the floor and either say this isn't going to take place, that this is not going to be protected by this resolution, or admit that it is, and that you do want it protected. Because at the very least, your constituents should know what it is you're voting on. Because it's not just nebulous terms like reproductive freedom or women's health care. It's this. You want to remove it? You can, right now, remove it. But you won't. The difference is now at least they'll know that somebody does want this, and this is happening tens of thousands of times every year in America. I would urge the members to vote against the resolution.
The delegate from Prince William, Delegate Munden King. Delegate from Prince William, Delegate Munden King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the resolution.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin my remarks, let's be clear because it only takes a second to Google. The D in D&E is for dilation. You know how I know? Because I've had to dilate. This is not something that I read about or received a definition from on social media. It's a lived experience, and lived experiences matter. Mr. Speaker, this resolution will go to the voters, mothers, daughters, women. And by the way, women's health care is not a dirty word. Reproductive freedom is not something to be frowned upon like any other freedom. But this resolution will go to the voters. But since we're talking about word salad today, let me give you a word that's very clear and easy to understand. Hypocrite. It is hypocritical for people who ruled this chamber for more than 30 years to sit here and pretend that they don't understand how to read the code, that they don't know that throughout the code section there are multiple hundreds of instances of the code referring to individuals in healthcare settings. But instead, they would like to use this moment to divide people, to once again disappoint their constituents, Mr. Speaker. Hypocrite. It is hypocritical for people who ruled this chamber for decades, sat here, sat there, and allowed their communities to become maternal health deserts where women can't even find one doctor, let alone 3. Hypocritical, Mr. Speaker. This resolution was not rushed. It is something we have discussed and debated and gone through the process for years. But again, we must sit through these hypocritical considerations of, I heard, somebody told me, well, maybe, well, this means that. No, what you're doing is you're playing with women's lives. Let me give you another word that's not word salad. Extreme. Extreme is forcing a 10-year-old victim of rape to carry her raper's child to term. That's extreme. Extreme is coming into this body last year and introducing a total ban on abortion without exception for rape or incest. Extreme. Extreme is forcing a woman to carry a fetus inside of them that is gone, to mourn her baby and hope that she makes it to take care of her other babies. That's extreme. To know the pain of not knowing if you will wake up in the morning because you are carrying decaying flesh of a baby you prayed for, a baby you hoped for, and you couldn't find 3 doctors because you live in a maternal health care desert that your delegate did nothing about, Mr. Speaker. That's the extremism that we see, and that's the extremism that the women of Virginia, the mothers, the daughters, will have the opportunity to go to the ballot box and make their own decision. Because what I refuse to do is allow this resolution to be mischaracterized as anything other than an opportunity for voters to have their say. But if you don't trust women to make their own healthcare decisions, obviously you don't trust voters either. It's not enough of you in this room to go to every doctor's appointment with a woman. It's not enough room in the doctor's visit for a delegate. So let the women decide. And Mr. Speaker, I'll close on this note. Well, let me just say this, because I believe it is so important to speak their names. Candy Miller, that's spelled C-A-N-D-I, just like you see on this screen. And every time I see Candy Miller's name flash across my TV screen about her tragic death due to abortion bans, my heart hurts a little more. Amber Thurman, whose mother's tears I can still remember because abortion bans took her baby's life. And Mr. Speaker, maybe my colleagues would add me to that list. Maybe they would add my daughter, because for us, with chronic illnesses, a pregnancy could be a death sentence. And I would much rather my doctor make the determination along with me and my family than a delegate who lives and represents a maternal health care desert. So I'll close on this. We all have stories. And I don't assume to know anyone's story. I don't assume to know where you come from and what brought you to this moment. But I beg you to please do the work to actually help people instead of sitting here and using women and our health care as though they are some dirty words, misinforming things that are simple Google searches, and pretending that you don't understand that this resolution will go to the voters and let the voters speak. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from Bedford. The delegate from Bedford, Delegate Griffin.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the resolution.
The delegate has the floor.
I want to point out what this resolution is rather than what we wish that it was. When we read the words that it actually says, I know we all know that the Constitution and a constitutional amendment is going to be higher than state law. We've already said that it supersedes those things. And so I think it's disingenuous when somebody says, oh, well, the constitutional amendment, if it passes, it won't matter. State law will still control. That's actually not true. It's been said, and I think clearly, that this is the most extreme law in the South. I mean, it puts us way far to the left of the Carolinas and Florida and Georgia and every other southern state. I actually went to the extent to go read Prop 1 in California just to see. And it is. It's way farther left than that. That's what is being pushed today. We've heard over and over again, this just codifies Roe. That's not true. Go read our Virginia Code 18.2, 72, 73, 74. Those are code sections that have actually codified in Virginia what happens during the first trimester, second, and so on. This makes no distinction of any of that. It goes far to the left of any of that. I started wondering as I heard, I read it, and I read articles about this, and how it took away parental consent for minors. And I started thinking, well, how does the Virginia Code deal with this normally? And I went and I started reading 18.2, 370, 369, 370, 371. These are the code sections that deal with tattoos in Virginia. And 371.3 says that if you are underage and you want to get a tattoo, that you have to get the permission of your parents, right? It clearly lays it out. And that's what a good law would do. It would make clear what a parent's responsibilities are, what a child can do with or without parents' consent. This doesn't do that. It runs roughshod over that. I think that when and you all have read it, many of you have read it, it says that the Commonwealth shall not discriminate. It says no laws can be created really, if we wanted to put safety precautions in place for new clinics, if we wanted to put rules in place to help protect these young mothers, this constitutional amendment would prevent that from happening. Why would we do that? Why would we cut corners on health care in the name of politics? It's outrageous and it's barbaric, and we must defeat this. I ask you to vote no today.
Shall the delegate from Prince William, Delegate Munden King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the resolution,
The
and this
delegate has
one
the
will be
floor.
quick.
Mm-hmm.
Let me remind you of the word for the day, hypocrite, Mr. Speaker. It is hypocritical to sit up here this year, Mr. Speaker, and now we can read and now we understand. When we had a bill just last session that would totally ban abortion and put women in dangerous positions. So let's not pretend, Mr. Speaker, that we understand regulations for healthcare centers or that we went to medical school, Mr. Speaker. Let's pass this resolution so that people who probably couldn't find a uterus with a map are not making decisions about women's health care. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the resolution be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 51, noes 48.
51, noes 48. The resolution is agreed to. Clerk will report a resolution.
Mr. Speaker, simply a communication from the Senate. The Senate has agreed to House Joint Resolution 476, which is the joint and continuing order with judges.
House will be at ease. House will come to order. Clerk will report.
Mr. Speaker, communication from the Senate. The Senate has executed the joint order pursuant to House Joint Resolution 476 and have made nominations for certain judicial offices and other offices of the Commonwealth. So they have acted, and therefore it's our turn, Mr. Speaker.
The time for the joint order has arrived, and the House, on its part, is ready to proceed with the execution of HJR 476. Nominations are now in order for the judges of the Judicial Circuit. The clerk will report a resolution.
Mr. Speaker, House Resolution number 472, nominating persons to be elected to circuit court judgeships.
Are there further nominations? The chair hears none. As many as favor the adoption of the resolution will say aye. Those opposed, no. The resolution is agreed to. Nominations are now in order for judges of the General District Courts. The clerk will report a resolution.
Mr. Speaker, House Resolution number 473, nominating persons to be elected to General District Court judgeships.
Are there further nominations? The chair hears none. As many as favor the adoption of the resolution will say aye. Those opposed, no. The resolution is agreed to. Nominations are now in order for the judges of the Juvenile and Domestic Relations District Courts. The clerk will report a resolution.
House Resolution number 474, nominating persons to be elected to Juvenile and Domestic Relations District Court judgeships.
Are there further nominations? The chair hears none. As many as favor the adoption of the resolution will say aye. Those opposed, no. The resolution is agreed to. Nominations are now in order for members of the Judicial Inquiry and Review Commission. The clerk will report a resolution.
House Resolution number 475, nominating persons to be elected as members of the Judicial Inquiry and Review Commission.
Are there further nominations? The chair hears none. As many as favor the adoption of the resolution will say aye. Those opposed say no. The resolution is agreed to. Nominations are now in order for the Auditor of Public Accounts. The clerk will report a resolution.
House Resolution number 476, nominating a person to be elected as the Auditor of Public Accounts.
Are there further nominations? The chair hears none. As many as favor the adoption of the resolution will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The resolution is agreed to. The delegate from Prince William, Delegate Maldonado, will inform the Senate of the nominations made by the House. The House will be at ease. The House will come to order. Block voting for judges and other judicial officers will now commence. Those in favor of the nominees for judges of the Circuit Court, as noted in House Resolution 472, for terms of 8 years commencing on the date specified, will vote yes.
All right, we got everybody.
Clerk will close the roll. Those in favor of the nominees for judges of the General District Courts, as noted in House Resolution 473, for terms of 6 years commencing on the date specified, will vote yes. Clerk will close the roll. Those in favor for judges of the General Belay that. Those in favor of the nominees for judges of the Juvenile and Domestic Relations District Courts, as noted in House Resolution 474, for terms of 6 years commencing on the date specified, will vote yes. Clerk will close the roll. Those in favor of the nominees for members of the Judicial Inquiry and Review Commission, as noted in House Resolution 475, for terms of 4 years commencing on the date specified, will vote yes. The clerk will close the roll. Those in favor of the nominee for Auditor of Public Accounts, as noted in House Resolution 476, clerk will destroy the roll. For those in favor of the nominee for Auditor of Public Accounts, as noted in House Resolution 476, for a term of 4 years commencing on the date specified, will vote yes. The clerk will close the roll. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the Speaker appoints Delegates Hope, Maldonado, and Kilgore, the Committee on Part of the House, to count and report the vote of each House in each case.
House will be at ease. The House will come to order. I love banging. I cannot get over having so much fun banging that gavel. The joint order under House Joint Resolution 476 will be resumed. The delegate from Prince William, Delegate Maldonado.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to report that the committee to count the vote of each house met and the nominees fulfilled the criteria for election. I move that the reading of the report be waived.
The question is, shall the reading of the report be waived? This is a recorded vote. The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, no 0.
Ayes 99, no 0. The reading of the report is waived. Those judges previously nominated in House Resolution 472, having received a majority of the votes cast by the members elected to each House, are declared duly elected as judges of the circuit courts of the appropriate judicial circuits for terms of 8 years commencing on the date specified. Those judges previously nominated in House Resolution 473, having received a majority of the votes cast by the members elected to each House, are declared duly elected as judges of the General District Courts of the appropriate judicial districts for terms of 6 years, commencing on the date specified. Those judges previously nominated in House Resolution 474, having received a majority of the votes cast by the members elected to each House, are declared duly elected as judges of the Juvenile and Domestic Relations District Courts of the appropriate judicial districts for terms of 6 years, commencing on the date specified. The nominees in House Resolution 475, having received a majority of the votes cast by the members elected to each House, are declared duly elected as members of the Judicial Inquiry and Review Commission for terms of 4 years, commencing on the date specified. The nominee in House Resolution 476, having received a majority of the votes cast by the joint vote of the two houses of the General Assembly, is declared duly elected as the Auditor of Public Accounts for a term of 4 years, commencing on the date specified. This concludes the joint order. The clerk will call the calendar.
Mr. Speaker, continuing with today's calendar for Tuesday, January 14th, we are in the category of resolutions regular calendar. Page 2 of the printed calendar, filling that way. House Joint Resolution 2 is now before you. As I recall, the printed version is incorrect, so House Joint Resolution 2, for everyone's benefit, is proposing an amendment to Section 1 of Article 2 of the Constitution of Virginia relating to qualifications of voters, right to vote, persons not entitled to vote. Mr. Speaker, that legislation was brought to the Committee on Privileges and Elections, and there are 3 floor amendments offered by Delegate Cherry. And those 3 amendments are available online for the members at his request, which is permissible. He would like to sever those so that we would vote on amendment number 1 and then vote on 2 and 3 together as a block. And those amendments are, did I do it right? Correct. Yeah. Do the first one. Let's do it just simpler, that one. Yeah, just recognize it.
Okay. Delegate from Colonial Heights, Delegate Cherry.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the proposed amendment.
Mr. Speaker.
Parliamentary inquiry. The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Simon.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to make sure I understand the order of what's going to happen first. So I know that there are floor amendments that have been described and reported. Do we hear the bill explanation, the explanation for the resolution first before we dispose of the floor amendments, or do we need to dispose of the floor amendments first?
I mean, the clerk has explained the resolution. Are you asking whether the delegate from Alexandria, who's the sponsor of the resolution?
Whether she gets to go first, or whether he gets to go first. That's all I'm asking, Mr. Speaker.
I think everybody's aware of what the floor resolution does, so I'll allow the amendment to go first. Go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Speaker, did I have a motion in that case?
The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Simon.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House pass by the floor amendment number 1. So it's been severed. There's floor amendment number 1, and there's 2 and 3. So I'm moving that we pass by floor amendment 1.
I don't know if anybody wants to speak to it. Usually 2 minutes to one side. Do you want to go first, Mr. Chair? The delegate from Colonial Heights, Delegate Cherry.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the motion.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, there's been no greater champion of rights restoration on this side of the aisle than I have been. But, Mr. Speaker, it's my belief that there are some crimes that may be so egregious that the perpetrators, by their actions, have shown that they do not care about their crimes, their victims, or any other outcomes. This bill seeks to restore rights to people that by their actions have disenfranchised others from their rights permanently. Murderers, those convicted of manslaughter and other crimes that took away another person's right to life, liberty, and their pursuit of happiness, as well as their right to vote or to access any of their other rights. I think, Mr. Speaker, that there are circumstances whereby once you have disenfranchised another, your right should be restored through a more rigorous process. I think those rights should be restored, but I think there should be a more rigorous process. I believe a good line in the sand is the difference as defined by the Code of Virginia in what constitutes a violent or a nonviolent crime. That's what this amendment would have done, was to simply say that nonviolent was automatic, violent would go through a different process. By using this line, we can assure that we are not rewarding criminals with their rights being restored when they have permanently taken away the rights of another. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Bennett Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The proposed constitutional amendment as proposed provides for the automatic restoration of political rights once a person with a felony conviction is released from incarceration, fostering a more just and fair society. The language is the same as what passed the House and Senate with bipartisan support in 2021. It would only apply to individuals who have already re-entered society after completing their period of incarceration. They've been through a trial with a judge or a jury and sentenced to a punishment. They've served their time, have been released, and are participating in society, paying taxes, and so forth. Continuing to impose punishment in perpetuity is contrary to our values in justice and redemption as Virginians. Governor Youngkin said something that really resonated with me. In issuing Executive Order 36, he said that every single returning Virginian has the opportunity to be a testimonial of hope or a recidivism statistic. I believe that we all want all returning Virginians to be a testimonial of hope rather than a recidivism statistic. And we know that the automatic restoration of voting rights benefits all Virginians by reducing recidivism and supporting reentry. The majority of Virginians agree that returning citizens who have served their time or participating in society should have that voice in that vote. Thank you. I would encourage everyone to vote yes on the motion to pass by.
The delegate from Fairfax, I think the 2 minutes has been exceeded. Shall the floor amendment, shall the motion to pass by be adopted? It's a voice vote. Oh, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those no? No. Ayes and nays go on the board. Let's go. Let's see if we can do this again the correct way. Yes, open it. Clerk will close the roll.
Mr. Speaker, ayes 52, noes 47.
Ayes 52, noes 47. The motion to pass by the floor, amendment number 1, is agreed to.
Now, Mr. Speaker, floor amendments 2 and 3 are now before the body.
Mr. Speaker?
Delegate from Fairfax. Delegate
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House pass by amendments 2 and 3 to the amendment.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Simon moves that the House pass by amendments 2 and 3. Delegate from Colonial Heights. Delegate
Speaking to the motion, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I would have loved to have seen the violent, nonviolent discrimination made about the rights restoration, but I think the least we can do as we move this forward is to make sure that the victim of the crime has been made whole first. Mr. Speaker, what this amendment would have done was ensure that before the rights were restored, the criminal would have paid their restitution to the victim of the crime. Restitution is intended to make the victim of a crime whole through a financial penalty, and I think that should be the minimum step required to show remorse for the crime committed and the person has a desire to make their victim whole. If we continue to put criminals first and do not advocate for the victims of their crimes, we re-victimize them over and over and over again. Restoring the criminal without first restoring the victim should not be the policy of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Bennett Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment The proposed amendment does not change the underlying goal of the constitutional amendment. Individuals under the constitutional amendment would not wipe out anyone's obligation to pay restitution. We know that having the right to vote helps people reenter society and be productive citizens, including securing jobs, which would actually increase the likelihood that they can pay the restitution. The right to vote is fundamental and should not be based on ability to pay. That would create a modern-day poll tax that unfairly penalizes those who have served their time, have reentered society, and are not yet able to pay off the court debt. I would encourage everyone to vote yes on the motion to pass by the amendment.
Will the motion to pass by be agreed to? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. The motion, ayes and nays. The clerk. There you go. Tell them, man. They out of practice, bro. I know. I feel your pain. I know. I feel you. Yes. Clerk will close the roll.
Mr. Speaker, ayes 51, noes 48.
Ayes 51, noes 48. The motion to pass by floor amendments numbers 2 and 3 are adopted. Back to the original resolution now. The delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Bendy Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment, resolution.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The proposed constitutional amendment provides an affirmative fundamental right to vote for qualified voters. It also provides for the automatic restoration
Clerk will close the roll. Hold on one second. Got to get the right bill up. You got Sickles' resolution up. All right, back to you. I'm sorry, Delegate. Delegate from Alexandria. Delegate
Thank you,
Parker.
Mr. Speaker. I am not Delegate Sickles, so I appreciate that.
Much cuter, much cuter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking again to the resolution. The proposed constitutional amendment provides an affirmative fundamental right to vote for qualified voters. It also provides for the automatic restoration of political rights once a person with a felony conviction is released from incarceration, and it also strengthens protections for individuals with disabilities, fostering a more just and fair society. The language is the same as what passed the House and Senate with bipartisan support in 2021. Virginia is the only state to permanently disenfranchise all individuals with a felony conviction unless they individually petition the governor for rights restoration. The current system has no transparency and changes every 4 years, so no one knows what steps they need to take to get their rights restored. This amendment creates a process that is transparent and bound by clear rules that will apply to everyone and is not left to the complete discretion of a single individual. The disenfranchisement of individuals with felony convictions is a relic of Virginia's Jim Crow past and was intentionally inserted into the 1902 Constitution to disenfranchise as many black voters as possible. Today, more than 1 in 7 black Virginians is disenfranchised, which is twice the national average. Automatic restoration of voting rights encourages voting and civic engagement, which research shows benefits reentry, reduces recidivism, and makes communities safer. So all Virginians would benefit from this policy. Another important aspect of this amendment is that it strengthens protections for individuals with disabilities, ensuring that they only lose their right to vote if a court adjudicates that they do not understand the act of voting. This contrasts with our current process whereby when guardianships are set up, those under them lose the right to vote, so you can be deemed legally incompetent to manage your checkbook and also lose the right to vote. This would change that by saying the court has to say you don't understand that before you can lose that right. The amendment supports reentry and empowers Virginians to fully participate and have a voice in shaping their communities. This amendment is about reintegration, redemption, and justice. Virginians deserve a democracy that works for everyone. For these reasons, Mr. Speaker, and on behalf of the many people who have worked tirelessly for many years to create a Virginia that is more fair and just, I move adoption of the resolution.
The delegate from Stafford, Delegate Milday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the resolution.
The delegate has the floor.
I had hoped Delegate Cherry's amendments would have passed so that I could have spoken in favor of HJ2, albeit with some reservations. However, as it stands, I strongly oppose this constitutional amendment. Mr. Speaker, I got in a lot of trouble as a kid. I continued getting in trouble as a teen. By the time I was a teenager, 18 years old, I found myself in jail again, and I was facing a felony drug possession with intent charge, and I was guilty. So I pled guilty, and I forfeited my civil rights and some others, and I continued on to serve my sentence, and intimately got to spend a lot of time with some other felons. So I know a little bit about what it means to lose your civil rights because of bad choices. The good news is that I was able to go through a lengthy and deliberate process to regain my rights. This journey began with the completion of my court-imposed sentence, of course, including all of the fines that were due. It was a process that allowed me and required me to accept responsibility for my actions, and acknowledge the consequences that came with them. And that was a process. Losing my right to participate in the electoral process was not only a safeguard of that process, it was a legitimate punishment. That made sense to me then, and it makes sense to me now. Mr. Speaker, if you want to participate in this, where we are now, then you have to play by the rules. And for me, having to earn back that made me appreciate, understand, and respect those rights so much more than I would have otherwise. This is evidenced best by the fact that I stand here now on the floor of Jefferson's Capitol as a Virginia delegate. And Mr. Speaker, I know you know exactly what I mean.
Don't put me in it. Oh.
Mr. Speaker, I was profoundly moved when I heard your story and your acceptance speech. You and I bring a unique experience and perspective to this issue. We both believe in second chances, but we must recognize that these chances are earned, not simply handed out. It is crucial that we provide opportunities for redemption in a thoughtful and measured manner, one that extends grace to those genuinely seeking to turn their lives around, while also safeguarding our community. However, Mr. Speaker, we both know there is a significant difference between serving your sentence and making a conscious decision to turn your life around and stop running afoul of the law. I believe we can find a wise, compassionate, and forgiving approach to this issue. I stand firmly, obviously, in favor of redemption and forgiveness. But this proposal goes too far, way too far. It's extreme. It doesn't give fair consideration to victims. And as written, HJ2 undermines the very principles of accountability and responsibility that are fundamental to our society here in the Commonwealth. I urge this body to vote against HJ2 and send this back to committee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from Newport News. Delegate from Newport News, Delegate Price.
Speaking to the resolution.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have heard the gentleman today and in our previous committee meeting. I have received many emails from across the Commonwealth. And the one thing that I know that because I was just here, I'm old enough to remember like 5 minutes ago when all of the Bible quotes came out and all of the themes of forgiveness and all of the themes that we see in the Bible were coming out. But then here, I'm just really confused because funny enough, the religious language is inconsistent and hypocritical. And I would point to my colleague to remind us that hypocrisy is the word of the day. So here's the hypocrisy from HJ1 to HJ2, Mr. Speaker. It has been a glaring omission because I will admit it is really hard to remain consistent with one's religious tenets while trying to deny a second chance to someone who has already served their time. Because I am a scholar of the Bible and I've read it. The whole thing, not just looking for proof texts and little words and sentences to be able to say to keep my own narrative going, but from cover to cover. And as a woman of faith, I'm just gobsmacked at the way that we, in 5 to 10 minutes, forget the book that we just stood on, and then just magically it's just not a part of this conversation. So that glaring omission is hypocrisy. Whether it's fruits of the Spirit, whether it's mercy, or whether it's non-judgment. I would implore some of my colleagues to go back and read that good book that they use for their narrative, and you'll see why it is not being used against this resolution in the same way. But, Mr. Speaker, there's another hypocrisy. Because in the exercises of the proof texting, the Bible quotes that are getting glossed over in this moment because they're inconvenient to someone's narrative, those inconsistencies and hypocrisies also extend to the gentleman that we just heard from and many of their friends. We hear again today from our colleague who has received his second chance. Not only does he have the right to vote, Mr. Speaker, he had the right to be in this building, sitting in these seats, because a previous governor gave him his second chance and restored those rights to vote. But, Mr. Speaker, we cannot stand in this current moment and rest on the laurels of previous governors when our current governor has an abysmal track record of sitting on applications at this moment from Virginians that haven't even heard a yes or no, or that received a mass email to say no. No explanation, no dignity of an individualized email, hypocrisy. But Mr. Speaker, I offer us a moment not to dwell in the past of the second chances others may have received, but let's go to the present. In 6 days, a convicted felon will become the president of this nation. And we sit here and say, no, Virginians, you wait for the whims of an individual with inconsistent religious principles to decide whether or not you deserve your right. I cannot imagine the emotions that would bring to an individual that has served their time, waiting to be reintegrated fully into society and get those votes back. Mr. Speaker, the victims of those 34 felonies have not been restored. Mr. Speaker, there was no time served for the gentleman with 34 felonies that happened recently. So it is really interesting to me, and I try really hard to see where people are coming from, but the glaring hypocrisy is not lost on us on this side or on the Virginians that are watching. So I ask, Mr. Speaker, just for the opportunity for Virginians who do have that right to vote, let's pass this amendment to get it on their ballot. And let's hear if they want to protect that right to vote or not. And so I would urge my colleagues, we cannot live in the past. We have to live in the present. And presently, we have a governor that is not restoring rights at the rate of previous Republican and Democratic governors, and we're about to have a convicted felon as a president. I urge that we vote yes.
House will come to order. The delegate from Culpeper, Delegate Freitas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the resolution.
The delegate has the floor.
It is always fun to get lectured on hypocrisy and righteousness by a political party that believes that an unborn baby should have less rights than a convicted child rapist. Because the bottom line is regardless of the nice-sounding language of polls show the Virginians want this, really how many polls went out and said, hey, do you think it's appropriate for a convicted child rapist, once they complete their sentence, to immediately get to participate in the voting process? Something tells me Virginians might actually address that poll a little bit differently. That's the sort of distinction that Delegate Milday was talking about. I actually believe that there are some violent felonies that should probably get automatic restoration of rights. I'm reminded of my father, who was LAPD, telling me that, you know, Nick, I knew some kids that lived in really bad neighborhoods and they got jumped into a gang, and the only reason they got jumped into it because it's the only way they could get to school without getting beat up. And if that kid gets in a fight, maybe he gets a felony. Should that kid get automatic restoration of rights? Yeah, probably. But then you have other situations where you have people that engage in egregious acts, to include acts directed at children. And our Democrat colleagues think that, well, of course they should immediately get to vote as soon as their sentence is served. I would love for the Democrats to suggest to us how to restore the rights of a murder victim. Now, again, I think all of us could come to some conclusion. There's some reform necessary with this process. I have a problem with a process that is exclusively decided by the governor of Virginia. I'd be happy to work with people to figure out how we can distinguish between somebody who might have made a mistake, maybe early on in life. Maybe it was violent, maybe it was nonviolent. But they've demonstrated over time and through the way that they've conducted themselves to be able to get automatic restoration of rights. I think you would be shocked to find out how many people on this side of the aisle, the strong law and order guys, that would agree with that. But if we're going to be told it's hypocritical, again, by a political party that thinks a convicted child rapist should have more civil liberties, more access to human rights than an unborn baby, well, forgive me if that just doesn't make a great deal of sense to me. And I'm not really sure which religious text you're reading that gives credence to that sort of thought, but I think it's absurd. So, Mr. Speaker, look, I understand my colleagues that vote for this. I understand my colleagues that vote against it. But if other members of the aisle want to insist on getting up that hypocrisy is the only way that we can possibly explain this, I would say go find a big mirror and look at it before you continue with that narrative.
The delegate from Fredericksburg, Delegate Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the resolution.
The delegate has the floor.
Back in 2009, Mr. Speaker, when I graduated high school, I attended a university called Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. And during our tour of Liberty University, we went past this particular mansion called the Carter Glass Mansion. This Carter Glass Mansion was the office of Jerry Falwell. This is the office where Jerry Falwell passed away. This was a historical site that they preserved. And I wanted to know what was so important about Carter Glass that they had to preserve his memory. Well, on the documentation, they tell us he was one of the longest serving U.S. senators from Virginia. On the documentation, they tell us the great work that he did for the federal banking. But what they neglected to tell us, Mr. Speaker, was the real history of Carter Glass. The man who was the author of poll taxes. The man who created a convention, and as I quote, he said the convention was to eliminate every Negro voter who can be gotten rid of legally without materially impairing the numerical strength of the white electorate. Mr. Speaker, and the convention came to order, it finished its business, and it reduced black vote by 80% in this Commonwealth. Now, I was confused, Mr. Speaker, because we are constantly lectured from the other side about the Democratic Party being the party of plantation owners. We are constantly lectured from the other side about the Democratic Party being the one that caused Jim Crow to come into the Commonwealth. But what we're not lectured about is how just upstairs on the third floor, Mills Godwin, who was a racist Democrat, came back in office as a Republican. What we're not lectured about is just across that room right there on that picture, Lacey Putney of sainted memory, who was a Democrat, became independent and started caucusing with the Republicans. What we're not told about is how we as Democrats are wrestling with the sins of our fathers and coming back to correct history, where we remove statues that, yes, the racist Democrats of yesterday put up. When we are changing the laws that, yes, the racist Democrats of yesterday put up. But then our colleagues want to lecture us on our history and then vote against things that they should be voting against. And so today, Mr. Speaker, as we vote on this resolution, if you want to side with the racist Democrat Carter Glass and uphold racist traditions in Virginia, vote against the resolution. But if you want to side with correcting history in the Commonwealth of Virginia and getting rid of this racist tradition, then join the right side and vote in favor of this resolution. Allow me to quote the Apostle Luke in chapter 4, verse 18. He said, Jesus was quoting, and he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of the sight to the blind, and to set at liberty those who have been oppressed." We can talk about hypocrisy. We can talk about red and blue. We can talk about left and right. But this is not an issue of left and right. This is an issue of repealing racist traditions, and it begins by supporting this resolution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from Montgomery, Delegate Obenshain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the resolution.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that distinguishes our rule-based legal system that we have here in America from the arbitrary and capricious systems that we see in other parts of the world is the value of certainty. It is the certainty in the process, and it is the certainty in the outcome of our legal system. And this is something that is not just important to victims of crime, Mr. Speaker, but it's something that is also important to defendants. In some countries, defendants have no idea what charges they face until they show up for their trial. In some countries, defendants don't know what punishment they face until the judge rules. But in our legal system, we ensure that defendants know the charges they face and their potential penalties before entering their pleas. Mr. Speaker, while I've spent most of my career as a prosecutor, I have also worked as a defense attorney, and I've defended those facing the most serious charges. I've had clients who faced the prospect of spending the rest of their adult lives incarcerated. And I know how important it is to have frank and open conversations with those clients. I know how important it is to be able to answer their questions, to talk about the potential penalties that they face, even when those conversations are hard, and even when the answers that you give them are ones that they don't want to hear. That's why I support the idea of a statutory rights restoration procedure. I believe a fair justice system is one in which a defense attorney can sit down with his client and explain before he goes to trial exactly what steps it would take and exactly how long it would take to have their civil rights restored. I believe that would be a positive reform for our Commonwealth. What I cannot support, however, is a scheme that completely ignores the rights of crime victims, as this resolution does. A fair approach is one that acknowledges the harm done to victims and requires, as a condition of any restoration, that any and all obligations to one's victims and to the Commonwealth are restored before the rights are restored. To do otherwise removes any incentive for victims to be made whole, and it leaves them feeling victimized once again. This time, by a justice system meant to protect them. Mr. Speaker, when I think about sitting down with the mother and the father who have lost their child because of a drunk driver who decided to get on the road and end that child's life, I cannot fathom looking that mother and father in the eye and telling them that that driver, at the very moment he steps out of jail, will be able to go right back to living the life they were living before, while their life has been irreparably and unimaginably altered permanently. Mr. Speaker, Virginians do believe in redemption. Virginians do believe in second chances, as I do. But they also believe that our actions carry consequences. And the most serious and violent criminal acts must carry heavy consequences. We simply cannot keep our community safe with a toothless justice system. I'm hopeful that bipartisan legislative effort at rights restoration can be achieved. We've heard from both sides speaking in support of that idea, and I will continue working towards it. But this amendment falls far short of acknowledging and respecting the rights of victims. And I cannot in good conscience support an amendment that so significantly reduces the consequences of serious, life-altering crimes without any recognition of the debt owed to the victims of those crimes. That is why I urge my colleagues to vote no on House Joint Resolution 2.
The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Simon.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the resolution.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I think I need to say this again. So first of all, I applaud the delegate's desire for certainty in the system. In fact, that's a big chunk of what we're trying to achieve here. I think everybody deserves some certainty. Right now we have an arbitrary and capricious process. But I'm also hearing the other side make this a victim's rights kind of a narrative, and this is a crime and punishment kind of a narrative. And I think it's important, and Delegate from Fredericksburg mentioned this, but I think it's important that we understand the origins of this clause in our Constitution, right? This was never about crime and punishment. This was never about addressing victims' needs. This was never, ever about, creating a more just society. I'm going to tell you exactly what it was about. And I'm going to read it slowly and clearly because I don't want anybody to miss this. This plan will eliminate the darky as a political factor in this state in less than 5 years, so that no single county will there be the least concern felt for the complete supremacy of the white race in the affairs of government. Mr. Speaker, that's Carter Glass explaining the purpose of the provision in the Virginia Constitution that this amendment seeks to repeal. All right? So you guys can graft on whatever other meaning to it you want. You can invent your own legislative history for it. I understand that we aren't big on fact-checking anymore, and so we just make up our own facts. But the fact is, we know exactly how this provision got into the Constitution. If you want to vote to keep it there, you're going to have to own that quote as well. It's time that we take it out. It's time that we support this resolution. I urge the body to pass House Joint Resolution number 2. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from Prince William, Delegate King, London King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the resolution.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't have a vocabulary quiz for us this go round because I see the last one triggered folks, But I want to speak on a very serious subject. I don't assume to know everyone's story and what brings them to this moment, and I don't speak for every victim's family. But last year, my family joined so many other Virginians when we lost a loved one to senseless gun violence. Wrong place at the wrong time, they said, and we grieved. Mr. Speaker, I honestly can't get the sound of my mother's voice out of my head crying over her grandson's body laying in the street. She cried over and over, "Wake up, wake up, wake up." Because the thing about grief is the first step is denial. It doesn't even seem real. We cried, we grieved, we followed the court cases. We want justice for him, Dario, who was about 10 years younger than me, more like a kid brother than a nephew, the life of any party, a father missed so dearly. We want justice for him, and we talk about it a lot. But not once in our grief did we say, you know what? You know what would make me feel better? Is if people can't vote anymore. We think that when we do get the justice that Dario deserves, that person should go to prison. We believe that people should be punished for crimes and for taking a life. But this amendment is not about that, actually. This amendment is about those who do their time, who pay for their crime, who pay their restitution. This amendment does not prohibit anyone from paying restitution. It actually helps reintegrate them into society so they can work jobs and actually pay their restitution. We want justice. My family, victims' families, and I don't speak for every victim's family, but we want justice, not vengeance, Mr. Speaker. So in the words of my mother, I ask my colleagues on the other side to wake up and stop pretending that this is about law and order, that this is about justice, that there is some righteous crusade to keep people from voting. Stop using families like mine to continue to disenfranchise people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the resolution be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 55, noes 44.
Ayes 55, noes 44. The resolution is agreed to. Clerk.
Continuing with the calendar, Mr. Speaker, final resolution, page 2 of the printed calendar, House Joint Resolution 9. This legislation proposes an amendment to Section 15A of Article 1 of the Constitution of Virginia relating to marriage between two individuals, repeals of same-sex prohibition, affirmative right to marry. The resolution report of the Committee on Privileged Elections with amendment, with a substitute.
Delegate from Fairfax, Marks, Delegate Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I'm a little worn out, but I am going to try this because this one is about love, about security, and the pursuit of happiness.
You want to move the committee substitute before you get into your stuff?
We can. I'll move the substitute if that's what you'd like, Mr. Speaker. Someone else could move it.
Shall the committee substitute be agreed to? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The committee substitute is agreed to. Now back to love.
Love it. You know, it's a great thing, Mr. Speaker. So, almost 20 years ago, and it will be 20 years when this is on the ballot for Virginia citizens to consider, we passed a really wild restriction on marriage and people trying to pursue happiness. You can look it up in your Constitution on Section 15A. And I like reading this because it goes so far. It says, what we're striking here, it says the Commonwealth's political subdivision shall not create or recognize a legal status for relationships of unmarried individuals that intends to approximate the design, quality, significance, or effects of marriage. Now, you know, a court can really figure out what that means. And nor shall the Commonwealth or its political subdivisions create or recognize another union, partnership, or other legal status to which is assigned the rights, benefits, obligations, qualities, or effects of marriage. So this constitutional amendment strikes that language. It replaces it with 3 sentences, and the second sentence is probably the most important. The Commonwealth and its political subdivisions shall not deny the issuance of a marriage license to two adult persons seeking a lawful marriage on the basis of sex, gender, or race of such persons. So it's pretty straightforward. I think that the country has changed a lot in this last 20 years. We have, you know, a few 100,000 or several thousand, I mean, a million people that became of voting age since then. You know, they don't really like this. And what the threat is that if the U.S. Supreme Court, and you all know about this, you know, that one of our Supreme Court justices suggested that maybe they needed to relook at Obergefell versus Hodges, which is what has stricken our constitutional amendment in 2015. We've been living 10 years now. Nobody's marriage has been affected by this. You know, people have been happy, and this language that the voters approved, not that big a margin really, considering the day in 2006, to be reconsidered to take this out of our Constitution and make sure that adult persons have the right to pursue their own happiness. So that's really all this does. And I hope that our colleagues will join me in giving the voters a chance to strike this language that they unfortunately agreed to in 2006. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from Culpeper, Delegate Freitas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the delegate yield for a question?
Will the delegate yield?
Yeah, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I noticed in the introduced version of this, it said religious organizations and clergy acting in their religious capacity shall have the right to refuse to perform any marriage. And that seems to have been stricken from...
it was stricken.
Okay, seems to have been stricken. Look, I'm a politician. That's bad enough. I chose not to add being a lawyer to it. But the thing I'm a little concerned about is this intentional? Is this essentially... Are we essentially now going to try into the Constitution what might be considered a shot across the bow or maybe a direct stripping of freedom of conscience when it comes to the performing of marriage ceremonies?
Delegate from Fairfax.
Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the gentleman that our Constitution of the United States of America protects people from freedom and gives them a freedom of association. We really never needed that part of it, so that's why we took it out of here. There's in 10 years now, I would defy anyone an example of someone forced to perform a marriage out, against their will. So that's one thing. Secondly, this last year, last year, we passed a statute that, quote, protected, because we have this belt and now we have suspenders, protected any officiant from the obligation to perform a marriage against their will. When we passed Delegate Henson's bill and Governor Youngkin signed it. So we have statutory protection, but really underneath it, we have a constitutional protection for freedom of religion, which is the most important amendment in our Bill of Rights, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Culpeper, Delegate Freitas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
I thank the delegate for that answer. However, I will say that the delegate is saying that we don't need it because we have a constitutional right at the federal level. By that logic, we wouldn't need any of this because the Supreme Court has already decided that this is protected. And yet the delegate still feels that this is necessary. And regardless of how we feel about the policy, I understand why he feels it's necessary in order to put it within the state constitution. But it just reinforces my concern that, again, if a judge is looking at this, if an attorney is deciding to make a decision, and the idea that people don't get sued for performing functions within the marketplace based on things like this, I would say is inaccurate. It may not have specifically happened in this particular case, but that's because we had statutory language. And now we're essentially going to, we put this in the introduce, and now it's being removed. I would imagine that if an attorney did want to make a case, pointing that out would probably be significant. It would probably be a part of the argument that they would make to eventually move to a position to where if you're unwilling to perform a marriage that would be covered under this constitutional amendment, you're either going to be required to do so or lose your authority to do so within the Commonwealth. Now, maybe that would happen, maybe it wouldn't, but I don't think it's unreasonable for many of us to assume that that might not only happen, but be the intent. And so, Mr. Speaker, I would just like to point that out and get this on the record, because I have a feeling that should this become the law of the land, we will see court cases considering this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the delegate from Fairfax yield for a question?
Will the delegate yield?
I'll yield, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask the delegate, and again, I know he is not a lawyer and didn't make that mistake in life, but I am concerned about a drafting aspect of this. So it appears to me, Mr. Speaker, and I would ask the delegate, that this would be the first time that we are distinguishing between sex and gender in our state constitution. And I'll note that even the federal Equal Rights Act that so many in this chamber work so hard to pass only says sex. It doesn't say sex or gender. So I guess I'm asking if the delegate was given any guidance from any attorneys about what might be the implications of distinguishing between sex and gender as is done in the resolution.
Mr. Speaker, Fairfax. Mr. Speaker, I tell Jim, I don't recall discussions with attorneys on that subject, I would just say that I think it's a good idea to put it in here. So we are protected on these grounds. So I would ask the gentleman in return, if we take it out, will he vote for the amendment?
The delegate from Shenandoah, do you want to entertain a question on your question?
Mr. Speaker, I guess I will procedurally yield to the question that was posed to me, so I yield. Mr. Speaker, I'd like being consistent. I was present when we instituted the amendment that memorialized marriage between a man and a woman. I don't intend to differentiate from that today, but my concern was how we are, what the unintended consequences, if that's the theme of the day, what the unintended consequences are for not just this section, but how courts may draw from this section that we have suddenly put that distinction between sex and gender in our state constitution, and how that might lead to unintended consequences and what those implications may be. Obviously, the delegate does not know what those implications may be, but that was the narrow concern that I was trying to get to the bottom of. So, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from Buckingham, Delegate Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the delegate yield for a question?
Will the delegate yield?
Wow. Yeah. Sure.
Mr. Speaker, I actually want to vote for this bill. I genuinely do. But you and I, unlike Delegate Freitas and the patron, did make the mistake of going to law school. And so I am doing this explicitly to create a record. I want to ask the delegate to state clearly that there is absolutely no intent whatsoever in this HJ to compel someone authorized to perform a marriage in the Commonwealth against their will. And compound question, Mr. Speaker.
Can I answer that one first, Mr. Speaker?
That's fine.
I absolutely do agree with this not compelling anyone to perform a marriage against their will.
Compound
that
question.
is the intent of this bill. That's your right under the Constitution now, and in the Virginia Constitution as well, not just the U.S. Constitution.
Sure.
The delegate from Buckingham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Compound the second portion of the question. And then if some individual, just so that the legislative record is so clear that when the courts look to the legislative record, they know what we intended when we voted on this, that if this person refuses to perform a ceremony that is against their conscience, that they would not be removed from the licensed agents of the Commonwealth authorized to perform such ceremony. That, too, is clearly not the intent of this bill. Correct? Question mark.
That is not the intent of this bill, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill.
The delegate has the floor.
I would say to the gentleman.
I think that there are people at a prominent pro-family lobbying group in Richmond who will remember as a freshman in another chamber in this building me saying, yeah, but why is the government involved in marriage to begin with? Which was not a very popular thing for me to say to them at the time. But here's the logical progression, Mr. Speaker, that I have seen over the years. Real tyranny is not created when one group of people define a word differently than another group of people. Real tyranny is created when the government compels individuals to behave in a manner inconsistent with their core values. Shall establish no religion nor make a law prohibiting the free practice thereof. So I know, and I don't want to get into some of the rhetoric that I frankly am taken aback by with name calling, but I know what my Bible says. It is not my job to enforce upon others what my Bible says. It is my job to dispense with my responsibilities consistent with our foundational principles, guided by my beliefs. And so I think, frankly, that we probably should respect the fact that the Catholic Church and the Southern Baptists may have different ideas than the Unitarian Universalists and other faiths. But it is terrifying to me to contemplate a day where a man or a woman of faith would be forced to perform a ceremony that violates their conscience. That, my friends, is what tyranny looks like. And so having received the very crystal clear assurance, I will alter my vote as I indicated I would. Thank you very much.
The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Simon.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of the resolution.
The delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, just quickly about what this is about. I want to remind everybody what this is about. And I talked a little bit about the legislative history of how the felon disenfranchisement got into the Constitution. So in 2006, we heard arguments when the Marshall-Newman Amendment got into the Virginia Constitution. And they said things like that same-sex marriage was unnatural. It would have deleterious effects on children, that would stigmatize these families, that they couldn't grow up healthy and happy. And so I just want to share briefly my own experience in my family with same-sex marriage, right? Because, as many of you know this, maybe you heard me talk about this before, but my sister-in-law is married to a loving woman, and they have two fantastic, well-adjusted, successful children, my niece and my nephew. And we attend family gatherings together. And we have ever since my children were infants, before they were born. So they've never known any different. And they don't see any problem at all with having their aunt, with having their cousins have two moms instead of a mom and a dad. And my two nieces and nephew, they know that they have a mom. It gets a little confusing sometimes which mom they're talking about. But other than that, it's been a perfectly normal, healthy, fantastic, loving, and supportive experience for them. And they've had a wonderful life. So all the things we talked about, all these parade of horribles we hear about, could go away. It didn't happen. And why is it important now? Why is it important that we do this in the Virginia Constitution? Why do we have to get this out? Because as Delegate from Fairfax said, there are folks on the Supreme Court right now today that think we need to go backwards, that think that the federal protections that we have gone too far. And if you think any precedent in the federal Constitution that protects individual rights is safe, I would remind you just to look back a couple of years when fundamental rights that had been secured for 50 years in this country were overturned in a single decision. Not a progressive whittling away, nothing like that. Just in one fell swoop, one decision, 50 years worth of what we thought were settled rights went away. And so if you think that some settled rights that are only 9 or 10 or 11 years can't be overturned by this Supreme Court, which is set out to work its way backwards and take us back to a different America, then you're sorely mistaken. So we need to do this in Virginia. I have clients in my law practice that own title as husband and wife, tenants by as spouses, as married couples, as tenants by the entirety. What do we do with all those folks that bought property together as a married couple if Obergefell is overturned? What do we do with all the people that adopted children if Obergefell is overturned? What do we do with all the people that set up their businesses, their trusts, their estate plans, assuming that they would always be viewed as a married couple if Obergefell is overturned, this Marshall-Newman Amendment snaps back into place, and everything we've done in Virginia, every law that we've passed that recognizes these loving unions is erased by our state constitution. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, you can argue over a point here or a point there. I wish they had said it better this way. But let's not forget what this is about. This is about families in Virginia. It's about loving families, about supportive families, about people that plan their lives around certainty, as we heard, and the importance of having that certainty. The way we give those families the certainty they need is to pass House Joint Resolution number 9. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from Prince William, Delegate Torian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, speaking to the resolution.
The delegate has the floor.
Just want to clear up something for a moment. I pastored for 32 years. And of those 32 years, no one ever confronted me about performing a wedding ceremony or not. When I was asked, I either said yes or no. And if I said no, I was not threatened as someone would take me to court for not wanting to perform a ceremony. So let's dispel this myth that someone is going to be sued. And then understand this, Mr. Speaker. We've gone beyond clergy performing wedding ceremonies. Judges do it. Lawyers do it. A whole host of folks do it now.
We can do it.
Delegates do it. So a whole host of folks are performing wedding ceremonies. And Mr. Speaker, let me also say this. These 3 constitutional amendments, we may or may not agree. I may or may not agree with all of them, honestly. But one thing I do know is that I respect the rights of the citizens of the Commonwealth to let us know how they feel about it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from Henrico, Delegate Willett.
Mr. Speaker, I call the pending question.
Jesus. Delegate from Henrico, Delegate Willett calls the pending question. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The motion carries. Shall HJ9, shall the resolution be agreed to? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 58, noes 35, abstentions 2.
Ayes 58, noes 35, extensions 2. The resolution is agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, that completes today's calendar.
Hallelujah. Per House Rule 51, the House has returned to the morning hour. Does the clerk have any additional announcements or communications?
Mr. Speaker, just the meeting is scheduled for the rest of the afternoon. It is as follows. Labor and Commerce, Committee on Labor and Commerce will meet a half hour after adjournment of the House over in House Room A in the lower level of the General Assembly building. Once the full committee is finished, then Subcommittee number 1 will meet, likewise in House Room A. Committee on General Laws is meeting a half hour after adjournment today over on the second floor, House Committee Room B. Once full committee is finished, then the ABC Gaming Subcommittee will be meeting. Both of those meetings are in House Room B. And then 2 hours after adjournment, or maybe after the full committee and ABC Subcommittee, the Procurement and Open Government Subcommittee will meet. So General Laws, 2 subs, there you have it, up in B. Finance Subcommittee number 2 will meet at 4 o'clock today, and in about an hour they'll be in the House Subcommittee Room House Subcommittee Room, South Subcommittee Room. Education, K-12 Subcommittee, they're going to move locations. They're going to be upstairs on the 12th floor, the House Appropriations Committee room, technical issues. So they'll be upstairs, Education, K-12 Subcommittee, 4 o'clock up on the 12th floor. The Conservative Caucus is also meeting at 4:30 today. Looking ahead to tomorrow, Wednesday, January 15th, first order of business will be CC&T Subcommittee number 1. They will be meeting in House Committee Room C on the second floor, County, Cities, and Towns, Sub 1. Then the full Committee on Education will meet at 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock in House Committee Room A in the lower level as regular. And then once they're finished, Early Education Subcommittee, they will be meeting upon adjournment of the full committee, all in the lower level House Room A. League of Women Voters Caucus is meeting at 8 a.m. up on the 7th floor North meeting room. At 8:30, the Committee on Agriculture, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources will be meeting House Room B on the second floor. At 10 o'clock tomorrow, Appropriations, Higher Education Sub will be meeting up in the Appropriations of the 12th floor. That's at 10. And then both caucuses will be meeting at 11 o'clock. Sorry, Republicans will be meeting at 11:30 in House Room 2. Democratic Caucus will be meeting at 11 a.m. in House Room 1 here in the Capitol. Mr. Speaker, that all the announcements I have at this time, sir.
The delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Herring.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, adjourn to reconvene tomorrow at 12 noon.
The delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Herring, moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to reconvene tomorrow at 12 noon. As many as in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion is agreed to. The delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Herring.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn.
The delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Herring, moves that the House do now adjourn. As many in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion is agreed to. House stands adjourned until tomorrow at 12 noon.